Another man and beast story now, on a rather more modest scale, but which also no longer takes place. 50 years ago, the professional rat catcher was a very necessary part of city and suburban life. Les Lawlor was born in Semaphore in South Australia in 1901. Both his parents were Salvation Army officers who were moved about the state on army business, until a growing family and economic necessity caused them to move to Broken Hill, where Les's father took a job in the mines. When his father retired, the Lawlors moved to Adelaide. Les Lawlor is talking with the ABC's Bryce Radford.
Yes, I came to Adelaide in about 1928 and began work as a sales representative for Gollan and Company, specialising in the sale of Bryant May's matches.
Was that a new product at that time?
I don't think it was actually a new product, but it was a struggling product and could not make any headway against the then predominant Swedish match companies. But we hit upon a new idea of showing the people that Bryant May's matches were just as efficient as the Swedish matches, and by almost a door-to-door, or at least a shop-to-shop canvass, we persuaded the people to give it a try, which they did, and within 18 months or so, Bryant May had captured the match market from the Swedish people.
When you left Bryant and May, what did you do after that?
Oh, I was on the dole for a little while. What was those days wasn't called the dole, it was called the rations. There was a Labor Party in power in South Australia at the time, led by Lionel Hill, and the rations, or the dole, handed out by that government were very meagre indeed. Today, apparently, one can live on the dole, but in those days you couldn't live at all on the dole, the pension, the rations they were called. In those days, jobs were very, very hard to get and exceptionally hard to keep, because if you built up a job and made it successful, the manager or the proprietor of the company for which you were working was sure to have a son out of work, or a son-in-law out of work, or a cousin out of work, or a brother out of work. And as the department that you were looking after became successful, he would move you out so that one of his relatives could have the comparatively easy job.
Mr. Lawlor, how did you become involved with pest control?
Well, it began slowly and accidentally, I think. There was quite a few strikes and labour troubles generally in Broken Hill whilst I was working there, and when a strike or a stoppage of some kind came on, I didn't stay in Broken Hill, but went to Sydney or Melbourne, or one time Bury, looking for something to do till the strike was over. And once in Sydney, I was asked to assist a man who was a rat catcher there, and I worked for him in more or less on a part-time job for some months. And there I got a taste for pest control. Later on in the Depression, when there was nothing else about here in Adelaide, I went first of all with the Adelaide City rat catchers for about a month, at no fee at all, just to brighten up my ideas, to modernise my ideas, if you like. And after a month or so with them, I began picking up the jobs handling rats for the various municipalities, and it built it up from there. There was a time, I think, when I was doing 6 municipalities for rats. It must be understood that the Depression being then at its height, rats were a great menace in Adelaide. I feel sure that there'd be twice as many rats in Adelaide then as there are people now.
Why were they so bad?
Well, rats, the number of rats in a place is dependent upon the amount of food available to them. Rats will always breed up in accordance with the available food. And in those days, things being so hard, almost every person put a few fowls or ducks in his or her backyard from which to get some eggs for breakfast. They fed the poultry, giving to them the kitchen scraps. And so the fowl yard became a place in which the rats and the flies and the poultry would have a fight to see who got the food, and the rats generally won.
Did you like the job of catching rats?
Well, it was an interesting job. Make as many as 15 calls a day, so that's 50 people one would meet a day. Yes, it was good, but as the Depression eased and people became able to dispense with the poultry in the backyard, there were less and less rats, and so less and less demand for my services. I had made a study of two things. One was the salt damp problem in houses, and the other was the termite problem. And I added both those things to my single-man company when I started, and I prospered from there. Today, in pest control, anti-white ant work, or anti-termite work, as it should be called, is easily the most important. We wouldn't do a rat job one a month nowadays. There's practically no rats at all. I have heard that rats are a very serious problem in Melbourne now. Why, I don't know, but the same thing does not apply to the suburb of Adelaide.
What about other cities? Do you know whether they have the same sort of problems as we in Adelaide have?
They have the same sort of problems, but not so many of them. The bigger the city, of course, the more trouble there is. Sydney would have probably as big a termite problem as Adelaide has, but remember, Sydney is 4 or 5 times as large as Adelaide. On the basis of population, I would say that Adelaide would be easily the worst infested city in Australia. In fact, perhaps I could go so far as to say the worst infested city in the world.
So that's a rather dubious title for us to maintain. What about the salt damp problems? Salt damp is peculiar to South Australia only, or is it something that is generally Australia-wide?
No, once again, Adelaide can claim to be the salt dam capital of the world. That is because of the salt content of the earth. You'd think of being the driest city in Australia, it'd have less dampness, but no, that doesn't work out that way.
Over the years, you must have seen some tragic stories. You must have heard of some very funny stories. Have you got any that you can remember?
No, there's nothing funny in pest control, or nothing funny in salt damp control. As a matter of fact, in salt damp control, you see more tears in the eyes of people when you tell them they've got salt damp and it's going to cost them something beginning at, say, $1,000 and ending at $10,000 to repair. I've often had people burst out crying when I've told them what their trouble would cost to rectify. Strangely enough, in white ant work, you don't see very many tears in the eyes of the person concerned. Many a time I've said, oh, this job will cost you £320, and they've laughed and chuckled. And thank God for that. I was told it was going to cost me $1,500. As a rule, people think that white ant work will cost them much more than it actually does cost them.
What about rats? Do you just lay baits for those these days, or what do you do with them?
Yes, we just lay baits. They present no problems nowadays. If you can remove their food supply, as you can in the majority of cases, they will eat anything that you put down for them because they're ravenously hungry.
Is that what you used to do in the old days?
Yes, we used to do trapping. In the old days, the days of wooden-floored butcher shops, for instance, just to give an example, the rats would live beneath the floors and gnaw fairly large holes in the floor of the butcher shop, and then when the butcher shop became deserted after closing time at night, the rats would emerge and feed upon the scraps of suet or meat or whatever there is in the sawdust, which was common on butchers' floors. Well, we used to in those days used to have great success by making the entire shop a rat trap. And this we used to do by progressively covering all the holes in the floor excepting one. And when you had the rats emerging from that one hole, it was a simple matter to suspend high above the hole a bag of sand and attach that to a string that led underneath the front door of the shop, so that at about 8 o'clock that night, when all was quiet, pulled up at the front door of the shop, went to your little piece of string, cut your piece of string. That meant that the bag inside fell flat across the only hole in the shop floor, and then you had all the rats in the shop at that time trapped. We used to then enter generally with a good fox terrier dog who would kill 5 or 6 a minute. And often you'd get 400 or 500 rats on the one night, and so break the back of the problem. Then, patiently, with traps very much like rabbit traps, you would trap out the remainder. Then the job, of course, was to rat-proof the shop itself so that no rat could come in again, and that was another job you'd work yourself out of.
So it was the dog that did more work than you did, ultimately?
Yes, well, the dog used to do the dirty work, really. The dog was a good dog would just merely grab a rat, one crunch of its jaws on its little skull would kill it, would toss it away and go for the others. And the others would be frantically trying to get away from the dog because we'd have the lights on then. As soon as we went inside, we'd switch the lights on. But they'd be on the bars which the butchers used to move the carcasses of meat around the shops. They'd be on the bars, they'd be everywhere, on the block, everywhere, trying to escape both the rat catcher and the dog with which he was armed. You'd always put bike clips around the bottom of your trousers, because if you didn't, you were sure to get a couple of rats run up your trousers leg, which is rather an unnerving experience. I've had it happen 6 or 7 times, and I wouldn't recommend it as a pastime to anybody.
Have you been bitten many times?
No, I've been bitten 3 or 4 times, one so seriously that it gave me, that I got rat bite fever out of it, but that was a long time ago.
I think whaling sounds safer. Veteran rat catcher Les Lawlor talking with Bryce Radford in Adelaide. Turn over now to side 2 for more memories of A Vanishing Australia.